make a start now. We're about 3 minutes over time. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. As I say, it's a virtual tour, so it's going to take us from St Albans to London and back again several times. So St Albans, as we all know, I'm sure, is just up here, north of London. And our tour today has got 6 stops in St Albans, and each one of them with a little story to tell. Now, I'd love to be able to do this for real. I'd love to be able to take you to London and take you to these places, but each one of these 5 stops that I'm going to take you to would be kind of like the basis of a whole walking tour in itself. So there are about 5 or 6 different walking tours that we could go just on each one of these stops. But our first stop is one of my favorite places to go because it's the pub. So we're going to go and sit down in the King Harry, get ourselves a drink, and I'm going to tell you a story about how St Albans is linked to James Bond. Now that means that we have to zoom right in to London. So this area here is the St James's area. We've got St James Square in the middle, we've got Pall Mall, and we've got St James Street, and it's renowned for its clubs. It's private members clubs like the Athenaeum, the Travellers, the Reform, the Royal Automobile Club, the Oxford and Cambridge Club, many others. And it's also renowned for its exclusive shops. You'll find, for instance, places like James Fox, a cigar merchant who supplied Churchill and Oscar Wilde. Lock & Co for your shoes. Fred Astaire got his shoes from there. And Lob, if anyone's seen Kingsman, that's where they go to get their hats made. And all of these shops, exclusive private members clubs, are there because of this place, St James's Palace. St James's Palace is... sorry, I'm just admitting a couple of late arrivals. St James's Palace is built by Henry VIII for Anne Boleyn. Now, she didn't actually get to live there because sadly she lost her head before it was finished. But it is an exclusive place and an exclusive area, and as such, that's why we are going to talk about it, because this club here is Boodle's Club. Now, a lot of these clubs are known as sorry, I'm just having to mute somebody there. A lot of these clubs are known as private members clubs now. They used to be known as gentlemen's clubs. So gentlemen's clubs sorry, could you mute yourself, please, whoever it is talking? It's not helping at the moment. I can't quite seem to work out how to do that. Thank you very much. So where was I? Yes. So private members clubs used to be called gentlemen's clubs because they didn't admit women. Now most of them do, except this one doesn't. This is Boodle's Gentlemen's Club. And this gentleman was a member of Boodle's Gentlemen's Club. Most of you will immediately recognize him. This is Ian Fleming, the creator of the Bond novels. Now, Ian Fleming was a member of Boodle's. He was also genuinely a spy. He was a part of naval intelligence. He knew about weaponry. Well, next door to the club, just across the road, is this club, this shop, Beretta, which was the gun of choice for James Bond in his first earliest novels. Ian Fleming was responsible for creating this commando unit. During the Second World War, 30 AU, Assault Unit, Commando Unit, with its motto, attained by surprise, was created by Ian Fleming, specifically to carry out covert infiltration behind enemy lines during the Second World War, which it did. Fleming was responsible for creating the operations, one of which was called Operation Goldeneye. Bond fans will know that's the name of a film and also the name of Fleming's Jamaican property. But Fleming wasn't just a member of Boodle's. I know, he was also a member of this club. This is White's Gentlemen's Club, just up the road. You can see Beretta is next door to this one. This is possibly the most exclusive private members club, certainly in London, if not in the country, and maybe even the world, who knows. It is established in 1693, not this building, but in 1693 the club is established. And if you go to Google Maps and you type in White's Club St James's, you won't get this club. It's not advertising for members. If you look at the front of it, it hasn't got a name on it saying White's Club. It's not touting for business saying, join us here and get free martinis, because it doesn't need to. These are the people who are members or have been members of this club. Prince Charles and Prince William still are. David Cameron resigned because of their policy of not accepting women. And this chap, David Niven. Well, David Niven was Ian Fleming's first choice for James Bond. This is who he wanted to play James Bond in the films. Niven himself was also a spy. But it was at White's Club that our connection back to St Albans starts to appear, because it was here that Fleming regularly met up with this man. Met him for lunch, met him for drinks, met him for dinner on a regular basis, because they worked around the corner together and Ryder Street. They were both from military intelligence, naval intelligence in the case of Fleming, MI6 in the case of this man. They're both from that clubbable elite, aren't they? You can see them. They wear the right ties. They speak in the right way, the right sort of accent. They probably know how to make a Vesper Martini. They certainly went to the right sort of schools. Eton in the case of Fleming, and then training at Sandhurst for the Guards. Westminster Cathedral School, equally prestigious, and then off to Cambridge for this man. And this man was responsible for perhaps the single most disruptive event in the history of our secret intelligence service, because this is Harold Adrian Russell Philby, better known as Kim Philby. Now, Kim Philby, during the war, was based at MI6 in St Albans, at the Glen Almond building. It is now the Busy Bees Nursery, hence no video there. I did get permission for the photo. But this is where Philby worked alongside Graham Greene, the novelist, Malcolm Muggeridge, the journalist, throughout the, for the early part of the Second World War in 1941. And they would often go to the King Harry, just a stone's throw away, for long, boozy lunches. Now, so far, so kind of boy's own, I suppose you might be saying, oh, James Bond, you know, their links with all that stuff, isn't it funny? Well, during this period from 1933, in fact, before the war and right to 1963, Kim Philby was the single most significant traitor of this country. He was passing secrets from 1933 to 1963 to the Soviet Union from within the state security services. And again, you might kind of think, well, you know, does it really matter? Well, they were on our side in the war, weren't they? Well, 1949, after the war, Cold War is already in well established. Philby is it's hard to believe, but Philby was head of Soviet counter-espionage, hard to believe, but he was a Soviet double agent. And he's called to America, where they discuss a plan to invade Albania to try to overthrow the communist regime there. And during the course of the next few years, 49 to 52, there are various incursions. Over 300 Albanian agents trained by MI6 on Malta go into Albania and are arrested and killed. Philby's passing the information about this to his Soviet handler on a regular basis. 1945, Stuart Mingues, the head of MI6, comes to Philby. Stuart Mingues is known as C. And he says to him, as head of Soviet counter-espionage, can you deal with this potential defector we've got coming through? A chap called Konstantin Volkov. Apparently, he knows lots of British agents over here who are actually working for the Russians. He even knows somebody at the very highest level, Philby. Will you go and deal with it? Of course I will see, says Philby. Promptly hands it over to his Russian handler. And of course, Volkov is arrested, tortured and executed along with his wife. That was what Philby did after the war. During the war, however, while at Glen Almond, just down the road from the King Harry, the Soviets asked him to do a job for them. They asked him to find out the names of all British agents working in Russia. And so Philby happened to know that the file with that information on it was just nearby at Pray Wood. And he happened to know a Captain William Woodfield, a very hard-drinking ex-special branch man, who had control of that file. So he invites him for lunch at the King Harry, and he gets him very drunk, and he gets the file out of him, and he gets the information, he passes it to his Russian handlers. Now, all so far so good. However, Philby also gets so drunk at this lunch that he can't remember afterwards what he's done with the file. So when Stuart Minges, C, comes to William Woodfield and says, I need that file, Woodfield, with the British agents in it, Woodfield turns to Philby, says, that file I lent you, can have it back, and Philby panics. Luckily for him, a secretary finds it amongst a load of old papers that he'd discarded. But imagine what could have happened, what lives could have been saved if suspicions had arisen at that time and he'd been arrested. Well, suspicions did arise, but no, never really enough, because let's face it, he's a member of Whites, after all. He's somebody who could hang around with people like Fleming and the nobility, talking about the right kind of martinis to drink and what it was like in the season. He was never going to get suspected. And as such, he managed to get away with it until 1963. Suspicions did get too much. He fled to Russia and was received with open arms as a hero. They even issued a commemorative stamp in 1990. And this, well, rather shabby looking square in Moscow is actually called Kim Philby Square. So that's how James Bond links to St Albans. We're going to scoot through the park now. We're going to go to St Albans School. I know it looks like a prison. That's what the boys would say at the school, but it is part of the school. It has two interesting connections, which we'll come back to. But this one zooms us right into this fantastic place in London, because this place, Westminster Abbey, is part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Did you know that is with the Houses of Parliament there and that little white church to its left, St Margaret's, all part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. A fantastic day out, but one particular link to St Albans and St Albans School is this gentleman, Stephen Hawking. His ashes are actually interred underneath this black marble stone. Just below this memorial, which is the memorial to Isaac Newton, the great scientist, and his tomb is right next to Newton's tomb on the floor just below the memorial. And what I think is lovely is here in Latin on Newton's stone, it says exactly what it says here in English on Hawking's. Here lies what was mortal of. Two great pillars of physics, if you like. Now, the thing about Newtonian physics is it'll get you out of bed and it'll get you to the pub and back without too much problem. Daily life, in other words, is easily explained using Newtonian physics. But when things get really fast, like light, or really big, like galaxies, or really small, like particles, Newtonian physics doesn't work. If it's really fast or really big, you need Einstein's relativity theories. And if it's really small, you need quantum mechanics, quantum physics. The big problem is that they don't work together. Quantum physics and relativity don't match. And that's where Stephen Hawking was working. This here is the equation for black hole radiation. He discovered the process. It's actually called Hawking radiation. This is a symbol of a black hole. And he was working on that theory, the theory of everything, hence the name of the film. And he had a glittering career ahead of him, did Hawking, in 1963 when he started. This is him on the right here. But of course, in 1963, he was struck down, or began to be struck down, with a motor neuron disease called Lou Gehrig's disease, which gradually paralyzed him to the extent that he was able to communicate only using one single cheek muscle to generate impulses to this device which generated his speech. Despite that, he wrote Brief History of Time after being paralyzed, which was a bestseller for something like 277 weeks. And he became famous, celebrity in The Simpsons. He was on Star Trek. And my favorite celebrity appearance of his is in a video promoting the Monty Python live show, where he sings through the device, he sings the Galaxy song, which ends with the lines, just remember, when you're feeling very small and insecure, how amazingly unlikely is your birth, and pray that there's intelligent life somewhere out in space, because it's bugger all down here on Earth. That was Hawking in that video. And this place is connected to the school, but also connected to a really gruesome story, which is where we're going to go next. Back into central London from the Gatehouse in St Albans, right here into just north of the city of London, just outside, is Smithfield Market, a glorious 19th century building that you see here, built by Horace Jones, who was also responsible for Billingsgate Market and Leadenhall Market, made a bit of a specialism of markets. and also the Tower Bridge. But of course, we're talking about many periods, so we could be talking about many periods here. So there are a lot of fantastic stories, some quite gruesome, of executions and other things that have gone on just here. But I'm particularly interested in this for our St Albans connection. This is Richard II. And in the time of Richard II, well, Richard was firmly of the opinion that he was something special. This picture, by the way, is in Westminster Abbey, where we were a minute ago, and you can see this picture. And Richard is the first monarch that we actually have an image from real life. This is it. This is a picture of the actual Richard, maybe aged in his 20s at this time, but he came to the throne as a boy king. He's only 10 years old, and he was the first to insist on being called Your Majesty. He was very convinced of his right to rule. This is him on something called the Wilton diptych. It's a two-part painting, 2 parts, hence diptych. It's actually quite small. It was a portable altar. You can see this. It's in the National Gallery. But here is Richard kneeling down with saints and angels and Mary and the little baby Jesus blessing King Richard. This is the divine right of kings. This is important for our story that's coming up. So that's what Richard believed in. Now, at the time he comes to the throne, though, things aren't going so well in the kingdom. Divine right or not, he's short of cash, he's lost lands in France, and his prestige is failing. He says to his leadership team, I need some ideas. We need to get some money quick so we can invade France and get back our prestige. So he sends the leadership team away for a strategy weekend. And they come back with an idea. They say, listen, boss, we've got this idea. We're quite pleased with it, actually. Quite a good idea. What about a tax to raise money, a tax that everyone has to pay, irregardless of whether they are rich or poor? Everyone pays the same. We thought we might call it the poll tax. Yeah. So it didn't go so well for Mrs. Thatcher in the 90s, any of us who remember that time, and that led to the poll tax riots, in fact, and effectively brought down a government. Well, it was pretty much the same for poor old Richard. The peasants were not happy. The peasants were revolting. They were very, very disconcerted by this demand, and there were mass refusals to pay. The peasants marched in their thousands up to London to complain, led by these two characters here, led by John Ball. Now, John Ball was what they call a hedge priest, basically an unordained preacher, a firebrand preacher who believed in absolute equality. He didn't believe there should be such a thing as nobility. And this chap here on the same painting, Wat Tyler, who also believed that there should be a republic. This was radical thinking for 1381 when you've got a monarch who thinks he's got divine right. Now, it's probably fair to say that for the majority of these peasants, it was simply a case of money. They said they had no objection to Richard the king. No. They don't have anything against the monarch. It's only the dastardly courtiers around the monarch that are the problem. We heard that recently at all? So, however, Richard realizes that this is pretty serious, because during the course of the revolt, the peasants have taken out Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and beheaded him outside Tower Hill. Richard agrees to meet them, and where does he agree to meet them? Right here at Smithfield. There was no market building at the time. This is 1381. There was a market. Market's been there since the 10th century, but a very much more basic principle. The peasants are lined up on one side of the field of Smithfield, and the king and his nobles are lined up on the other. And I love this. I really love this bit. Wat Tyler rides across the gap. Now, remember, this is the king with the belief in his divine right to rule. Wat Tyler, the peasant from Kent. And Wat rides up to him, grabs him by the hand, shakes his hand, says, all right, king, how's it going? They have a chat. And then, you know, the story gets a little bit hazy, but I prefer this version. Tyler calls for a drink, and he downs a flagon of ale and belches in the king's face. This doesn't go down so well with William Walworth, the Lord Mayor, who promptly stabs Tyler in the neck. wounding him fatally. Tyler turns, rides his horse back towards the peasants, even though he's about to die. He falls from his horse, lying on the floor with blood spurting from his neck, and the peasants realize what has happened. Arrows come out, bows are drawn, they are ready for battle. And Richard, well, Richard believes that he's got divine right, doesn't he? So 14 years old, he rides across the gap of Smithfield to the thousands of armed peasants with their bows drawn, and he rides over to them and says, "Calm yourselves, gentlemen. There's no need for this. All your demands will be met. Now off you go home, and no more of that nasty looting." And he leads them away, and they go off peacefully, believe it or not. And then Richard rounds up his nobles and said, "Right, get all the ringleaders and let's get rid of them." And that's what happens. Wat Tyler is dragged out of St Bart's Hospital, which is where he was, and he's beheaded by William Walworth. And Richard issues a proclamation once everyone's gone home, thinking, what a lovely king. And the proclamation goes around the country, and he says to them, "Rustics," i.e. servants, peasants, low life, "rustics you are, rustics you shall remain, but in bondage incomparably harsher than it was before." And John Ball? Well, John Ball is brought here to St Albans. And John Ball, now, if there's any squeamish or young out there, cover your ears, eyes, and I'll let you know in a minute when to get back to us, because this is where John Ball is hanged, drawn, and quartered, right here on this lovely green called Romeland in central St Albans. He's hanged by the neck until not quite dead. He's cut down, cut open. Various bits of him are cut out or off and burned in front of his eyes. And then he's beheaded. And then his body's cut into 4 pieces. And the 4 pieces are sent all around the kingdom as a warning to the peasants. And his head is stuck on a spike on London Bridge. So, don't mess with the royals. So we're going to scooch along the side of the Abbey and go and get a drink, because I need one after all that gruesomeness. We're going to go to this wonderful pub, the White Hart, a fantastic location, and you can still go in there now and have a great evening, and you can stay in the hotel. Now, there's been this pub itself is from before the 1500s, but it has been the site of a scandal from the 17th century, which rocked the nation. And this is where I promised, if those who've been following me on Instagram, I promised you to get all a bit Bridgerton. This is where we get to the Bonking Georgians. We need to go into town for this, and we go right the way into Mayfair. Now, John Ball, if he knew how London is owned today, would probably be spinning in his grave. Well, there's 5 bits of him, so he'd be kind of doing a breakdance around the country. Anyway, put it this way, he wouldn't be happy to find that essentially Chelsea and Sloane Square are still owned by one family. The Portman Estate and Howard de Walden divide up most of Marylebone and Fitzrovia, and the Grosvenors own Mayfair and Belgravia. Now, the Grosvenors are what we now call the Dukes of Westminster. This is Hugh Grosvenor, current Duke of Westminster, richest person in the world, under 30 years old, worth £10 billion. His grandfather, I think it was his grandfather, maybe his great-grandfather, was once asked to give some business advice to some young entrepreneurs. And he said, "The best advice I can give you is to be closely related to William the Conqueror, because that's how the family ended up with the land." Now, they developed it in the 17th century, and they turned it into a highly desirable property. But just south of there, a place called Shepherd Market, which became renowned actually for high-class sex workers, courtesans. Kitty Fisher was one. Here she is. She's got a bar named after her, still in Shepherd Market, which we can go and visit. Notice the cat and the fish, Kitty Fisher. See what they did there. Now, the point about that, though, is that this area is where our story really starts, connecting us back to St Albans, because it's in a shady alleyway just like this in 1769 that a gentleman approached a young prostitute, and he invited her back to his hotel room, and I'm quoting here from the court reports, and she said, "He came at me ready for action and rogered me. I then sat on his lordship's lap naked for a quarter of an hour, and then Lord Grosvenor rogered me again." Yes, it was from that court report, Richard the First Earl Grosvenor in 1769, who appeared in those court proceedings. But it wasn't because of his bad behavior. Oh no, it was because of his wife's bad behavior. Henrietta Vernon, a noted beauty in the 18th century, who married Richard Grosvenor and regretted it almost immediately. There was a 14-year age gap. He was 14 years older. He was a gambler in those gentlemen's clubs we mentioned in St James's. He lost one night £250,000 in 18th century money, so nearly £1 million in today's money. So as well as being a dirty dog and a gambler, he wasn't really much fun to be around. It's no wonder, therefore, that she turned for love to this gentleman, Henry, Duke of Cumberland, the brother of George III, a prince. How lovely. And they actually were in love. We have their love letters. He writes to her, "I love you more than life itself." And she replies, "I have to go, he's coming upstairs." Now, Baron Grosvenor knows about the affair. He's got the letters and he wants proof. To get a divorce, he needs actual proof of them actually in the act. And so Henrietta is often travelling between the estates in Cheshire and the estates in Mayfair. And when she does, she stays here at the White Hart in St Albans. And on this particular occasion, in 1769, Matthew Stevens, the servant of the husband, Richard Grosvenor, has been employed to spy. And so when they check in and Henrietta goes upstairs to her room, he nips upstairs and he drills wooden drills 2 spy holes in the door of her bedroom. Shortly afterwards, Henry turns up to the hotel, checks in, moves into the room next door to her. And shortly after that, Matthew Stevens in the court report says he heard amorous noises coming from behind the door. Now, it's not enough for him to have seen it through the spy hole. He needs witnesses. And so he brings up some extra witnesses, not 1, not 2, but 10 other people come up to the door of room 8 in the White Hart, bash the door down, run in and catch them, the Duchess frantically dressing herself and the king's brother saying with his trousers around his ankles, "Do you not know who I am?" To which they all chorus, "Yes, your majesty." Cue a court case and much washing of royal underwear in public. Now, slightly less fun, this next part. This is Christchurch on Verulam Road in St Albans. And this takes us right into the City of London, the financial district, the Bank Junction. Here we've got Mansion House, Lord Mayor's House, we've got Bank of England, but we're interested in this building directly opposite, the Royal Exchange. The Royal Exchange, a lovely place to go now, actually. Fortnum & Mason's cafe inside and fantastic toilets, so I'm told. But we're interested in the pediment outside, and this represents trade and commerce, which is what the city's famous for. And on that pediment, you'll find representations of traders, like this is a Turk here, Chinese person, Levantines, and a kneeling black African. A kneeling black African. Why is that? Well, because the black African is a commodity. We are in the slave trade. 250 years Britain was involved in the slave trade, sometimes called the triangular trade. We would take textiles, rum and guns from Europe and sell them to, or swap them in Africa for human beings, take those human beings over to the plantations in the Americas where they would be traded as slaves. Those slaves would then produce sugar and tobacco, which would then, then be transported back to Europe. Something like 12 million slaves were transported from Africa to the Americas. We Brits did our part, 3.5 million apparently in the British slave trade. The Portuguese were the biggest slave traders, but of those 12 million taken from Africa, only 10 million made it across the Atlantic. Now, I tell this story, and I will be telling this story on the City Walk, the walk in the centre of London, outside here, outside Guildhall. Guildhall is has been for many hundreds of years a central town hall, if you like, of the City of London. And here court cases are heard. And this one court case is from 1781, and it concerns this ship, the ship called Zong, a slave ship, which has recently left Africa with 440 enslaved Africans on board in 1781. It is it's really gets quite squeamish again at this point. Sorry if you have concerns about this, because the navigator of the Zong is pretty bad at his job. And they believe that they are several weeks away from Jamaica. They're running out of water, and they don't think that they can survive. And if they do survive, then the slaves will be so emaciated they won't be worth anything. So the crew take the decision to throw 132 slaves overboard in the middle of the Atlantic. Yeah. Now, the reason we know about this is because when they got back from this journey, the people who owned that ship made a claim on their insurance for lost property. Yes, the lost property they'd thrown overboard. And they won. They won the case. Now, it was appealed by the insurance company and it was overturned because the judge said, well, you can't claim on this because you ran out of water. You weren't going to run out of water because you're only a couple of days away because the navigator was bad at his job. And it rained on the second day anyway, so you could have collected enough water. No mention was ever made of the murder. There is one bright spark in this, only one very bright spark, which is this chap, Oleoda Equiano. He's an enslaved person in America. He makes it over to the UK after various adventures and settles in London. And it is he who brings this case to the attention of the abolitionist movement. And it is this that starts the momentum, thankfully, for the abolition of the slave trade in 1807, and then the abolition of slave ownership, manumission, in 1833. And the reason I tell this story is because just down the road from my house is this strange looking gate. And I often wondered about it and researched it. Turns out it's the gate house to the country house estate we now know as Sopwell House, which was known as New Barnes House in the 17th and 18th century, 18th and 19th centuries, and was owned by one Joseph Timperon, a local person who lived in St Albans and was a slave trader and owned plantations in Jamaica and was a slave trader in partnership with his family in 14 slave ships and owned New Barnes House. And you can look this up on this website, Legacies of British Slave Ownership. And if you do, you'll find that he received money when his slaves were set free as compensation. No compensation for the slaves, compensation for the owners. £30,000 he got, Joseph Timperon, worth £3 million today. And his daughter, Isabella Worley, built the fountain behind Victoria Registry Office and also Christchurch, St Albans. I tell this story because I think it's important to realise it's part of our history. But I don't know about you, I really need a drink now. So we're going to go to our last stop, the Blacksmith's Arms. The Blacksmith's Arms is a pub in St Albans which has a great connection to this part of central London. Soho, and in particular, just across the street, Denmark Street, closely associated with the music industry. It's called Tin Pan Alley because it references the Tin Pan Alley in New York, 28th Street, where so many music publishers were based, and they were here as well, or still are as well. But it's like royalty, the numbers of people, the rock royalty that's posed and performed here. The Who recorded here. David Bowie used to sleep in a converted ambulance on Denmark Street. The Kinks recorded here and even wrote about it, Denmark Street, on their album. Paul Simon recorded here, and he took the two songs, you might have heard of them, Homeward Bound and Sound of Silence, to a publisher on Denmark Street who said, no chance, mate, not commercial enough. So Tin Pan Alley is where all of these people came. Elton John worked as a music publisher in this reddish building here. And his mate, Bernie Taupin, says it was on the roof of that very building that he wrote, while kicking off the moss, the words to Your Song. And this lot, the Rolling Stones, Tin Pan Alley Members Club members, they recorded a classic album here on Denmark Street, their first album. Interestingly, their first hit was recorded here, which is ironic considering how long they've been going on. It's called Not Fade Away. But there it is, Denmark Street, Regent's Sound Studios still exists today. And next door, almost next door, just up the road, is a place almost as significant. Number 6 Denmark Street, where a band lived in 1977, as well as recording early demos. It was the Sex Pistols who lived there, Johnny Rotten, Sid Vicious, Steve Jones, etc. Glenn Matlock at the time. And they recorded Anarchy in the UK for the first time there. And John Lydon, while living there, made these graffiti. You see Fatty Jones is Steve Jones, Nancy Spungen, girlfriend of Sid Vicious, over here. This is Malcolm McLaren clutching the money, and this is a self-portrait of John Lydon. which is all very jolly, and you know, I'd quite like to go and see it. But I was quite surprised on researching this to discover that it is a listed building because of those graffitis, which are, according to this website, Historic England, a physical manifestation of the punk phenomenon of the 20th century. Now, one last connection, though. This is the connection to St Albans, because just opposite the blue plaque on Denmark Street is this shop called Argent's, formerly a keyboard shop, now a sheet music and accessories shop, as you can see. And it was formed, set up, created by Rod Argent. And Rod Argent was a founder member with Colin Blunstone of a band called The Zombies. And the Zombies formed right here, the Blacksmith's Arms. All five of them met here for the first time. Now, some of you may be saying to yourself, who? The Zombies? This is them, clean-cut lads in the 60s, as they were. Well, they were inducted in 2019 into the Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in America. They haven't aged terribly well, bless them, have they? But they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with people you may have heard of, like Radiohead, Stevie Nicks, The Cure, Janet Jackson, and Roxy Music. But I'm really interested in the story of the Zombies because it's almost like they were shadowing another group, the Beatles. You see, in 1962, the Beatles walked downstairs into a studio in West Hampstead, Decca Records, and they met this man, Dick Rowe. He definitely earns that name because he's the man who turned down the Beatles. In 1962, he said to Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles at the time, he said, no, guitar groups are on the way out. Yeah. Very soon afterwards, he signed Stones, to his credit, and he signed the Zombies very shortly afterwards. They walked down exactly those same steps to meet Dick Rowe in 1963. And they were signed on the recommendation of George Harrison. They were also, with this song, She's Not There, the second band to break it in the US. Remember, the Beatles went over in 64 and were mobbed and massive. Well, the Zombies were next. They were literally the next British band of the British invasion to have a #1 with She's Not There. They were being mobbed every night. They were playing Madison Square Gardens. Rod Argent says in one of the interviews I read, he couldn't even get out of the theatre because of the weight of teenage females outside. Now, they also followed the trajectory of the Beatles further on. You may have heard of this album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, 1967, Summer of Love. You can see some of the effects, perhaps, of their encounters with LSD. Well, this was recorded at Abbey Road Studios, and the Zombies were the very next band to walk in after the Beatles. John Lennon offered to manage them. They used his Mellotron right here in Abbey Road and recorded this Odyssey and Oracle, which may suggest their encounters with LSD. Now, what I like about this, the great story about this, is the spelling, because for years, for decades, Rod Argent tried to pretend that this was, you know, some kind of counterculture idea about it being to do with poetry, the Odyssey. Yeah, Odyssey should have a Y in it. It was only a couple of years ago that Terry Quirk, who was actually the artist designer, revealed that he just spelt it wrong and nobody noticed at the time. But one thing that comes from this album, which I really do encourage you to know about, is this song, Time of the Season. It's an absolute classic of the 1967 Summer of Love. And on any compilation, any of those sort of BBC shows that does that thing, you find that song. And they're still going, the Zombies, even today. Look, scheduled dates in 2021 in Scandinavia, big in Scandinavia they are. They're still going. This pub, thankfully, I've just heard, is still going and will be reopening in less than a month. So I really hope you've enjoyed that. If you want a walk of St Albans, these are the people to get in touch with. These are the specialists, the local Green Badge guides. If you want to walk in London, get in touch with me. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'll be really happy if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask some questions or anything like that, find out any more. But otherwise, thank you for being here tonight. Did a great thing, raised a lot of money, and it's lovely to have you. I hope you've enjoyed it.